So welcome to the session on state capture and think tanks. I'll be a host, but it is only to be a host of a discussion. And as I mentioned in welcome to this group, the idea is that that we discuss what is unique about state capture context, how does it affect think tanks, and then to see if anybody wants to join me in setting up a community of practice where we would discuss how to address the challenge of state capture. So these are the three things I wanted to share with you, and I wanted to be as participatory as possible. So I don't want to give much of a lectures, although there were discussions already on a concept. I'm going to share with you my screen now, the presentation I have, so that you can take part and contribute to discussion. So I'll share the screen and I'll share in a chat also the link to this PowerPoint presentation. So do you see? Okay, so something is wrong, sorry. So this is a presentation we are going to work in, and I'm just going to share it now in the screen also. Okay. So, guys, you can follow it if you go to this link. It's a Google slide so that we can all work together in this presentation. What I'm going to invite you to do is to join me in the presenting yourself. By choosing where you stand now in relation to the two questions. One is, how would you compare situation in your country regarding democracy before the COVID? So for example, you take this text box and I would write Sonja, Serbia, and then you move it where you think it stands in this specter. So for example, I would put it here that it's worse than it has been before the COVID-19 crisis. And the second question I would like to ask you to contribute to is, again, to take your name and then try to place the country where you are or with which you work or the region you work with, and try to name the context, whether it's totalitarian, moderately authoritarian, hybrid, or whatever you want to name it. There is proliferation of the names, and try to put it on this spectrum from 1 to 10. So for example, again, I'm showing for Serbia. Sorry, this is a bit wrong. I would take it and, put it somewhere here. Okay. So I don't know if I shared the presentation wrongly. Oh, I think I've made more of a problem now. But I see that some of you have been logged in a Google slide, so please join me by filling in the slides 4 and 5 while I sort out sharing of the screen. So I'll turn off the sharing now, not to confuse you, and ask you to go to the link in a Google slide and try to answer the two questions in the slides 4 and 5. I have shared it so that anyone with the link can have access, and I'll check again that you can, oh, sorry. You're right. Anyone with a link can edit. So you can work now. Thank you, Bridget, for highlighting this issue. And welcome to Mia, our latest participant. So go to Google Slide and try to answer questions on slides 4 and 5. Great, I see that there are quite a few people in Google Slides area choosing, putting their country. So you can put the country in which you live or the countries in which you work, because I know there are people here that cover a number of countries in a certain region. So it seems that US, Serbia is worse than before COVID when it comes to democracy. North Macedonia, I guess, more of the same, or in between worse and the same. India, similar to North Macedonia, so not huge change, although we don't know whether it's for better or worse, what was the situation before the COVID. Kenya, I see also closer to the worst situation when it comes to democracy. Argentina, so only Singapore seems to be doing a bit better than before the COVID when it comes to democracy of the people who are with us. When you finish the slide 4, if you could move to the slide 5 and try to put your country or the countries in which you work on a spectrum from totalitarian to consolidated democracies, and try to name the context in which you live or work. Okay, so we've got the response from Chris in Singapore that actually digitalization led for more democratization. People feel more empowered. Thank you, Chris. So if you can move to slide 5. The 6 has left with India, but I guess it's okay as long as we know where it is. So Singapore is put among the most consolidated democracies. Kenya, hybrid regime, but I guess you would give a lower grade than for Kenya. And I see Mia's comment in chat that not sure whether to call democracy or not at the moment. Yeah, that's the trigger. That's the tricky part. You probably still have in place many democratic institutions, but they're not doing the right job, and there are processes that undermine the competition, the fair competition. So anyone to help out Mia or anyone in a similar situation that wants to put US somewhere on this spectrum? So I see three hybrids, Kenya, North Macedonia, although with very different grades, India, Serbia, I've labeled as moderately authoritarian. Chris has put Singapore, I can't read what's in there, one-party dominated democracy. Okay, so that's an interesting explanation. And yeah, so those are the people that have joined in a Google slide. Is there anyone else? Okay. US democracy is in danger. That's a good description. Yeah, we didn't ask for scientific labels, but how you feel about the quality of democracy in your country. And I think this one is communicating really well the situation in many countries, not just the US. Fikila, I hope you will be able to edit now. I have changed the performances when Bridget has highlighted, so please try. So it seems that we have many countries that formally have features of democracies, I guess elections, division of power, at least on paper, but their performance is becoming hybrid or skewed, and we are worried. So I think that Kenya got the worst grade. Some other countries are in between, and some countries that are higher up, like US, we have seen being labeled as democracy in danger. So this is exactly the topic I wanted to discuss with you. So if you allow me, I'll move to the next slide and start presentation on what is that unique about the state capture context. The question that I think Chris or Jan has asked earlier on. This is the only part of the session where I'm going to speak a bit, just to present what I found are good elements of the concept of state capture. And we can, of course, have a debate on it. But what I would want to ask you to do is to put in a chat any examples from the countries that you know where this has taken place or where you have confronted this challenge. And then in the later half of the session, we are going to discuss what does it mean for think tanks and civil society, and what could we do together if we set up this community of practice to do an exchange. So what do I mean by state capture? I think the best way to describe is through a story. Of how did I know a country which could be described as a state capture. So these are photos all related to a project called Belgrade Waterfront, project of modernization at the banks of River Sava in the downtown of Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. On your left side, there is a model of the new part of the city that is going to be built, and it is being presented by a president of Serbia, the tallest guy here pointing, with his investor for Middle East. But the worrying thing about this project was that in order to build it, they needed to destroy a number of old buildings, warehouses, and change the urban plan for the city of Belgrade. And the way to do it was that they have actually adopted a special law which put this project above the Constitution of Serbia, above all other documents, legislation related to urban planning, environment, traffic, and so on, because it was justified as a project of strategic interest for a country. The guy in the middle is the mayor of the capital at that time, who was one of the pioneers of the project. And since they've changed the legislation, they thought that everything would go smoothly, but it didn't, because there were some people who owned the property in this area that didn't want to sell it. So what has happened, and this is the photo on your upper right, is that 4 years ago, on the night of the elections in the spring of 2016, a group of masked men has come with bulldozers and destroyed the private property, the warehouses, and other property in that area overnight. During that night, people living in a neighborhood have called police, but he didn't show up at the scene. They were claiming that they were not responsible, but that it is a city kind of inspection force in charge of it. So nobody showed up while this was going on, and while the masked men were destroying the part of the city and kept in custody 2 people that happened to be there, a guard of one of the warehouses and one of the passersby. So the mayor has showed up at the place the morning after. That's the photo at the upper corner. And the police, unfortunately, showed up only the morning after, while there is a record that documents that they had an order not to show up when this operation was going on. As well, the electricity of the city was turned on in the area during the night, so to avoid fire, which are all the proofs that this was a state-sponsored kind of violence and destruction orchestrated. And the poster in between is symbolically criticizing this move. And we had the protest around this issue. So this project of Belgrade waterfront is exactly the example of state capture, because it actually shows all the elements that you can take the public good, like part of the city, for private benefit. So the government said that we are going to fund this project, although more ownership is given to the private owner that is investing less. So there is a suspicion of a money laundering scheme. It's done through legislative means, through institutional means, and it uses different branches of power for it to happen. I don't know if any of you have experienced anything similar in your countries, any example that you would highlight. I see Jessica writing about the highway in Kenya, exactly during the COVID lockdown, which is encroaching the Nairobi National Park. So yes, I would imagine that COVID has opened the doors for a number of these special interest projects that during the normal times might be confronted by different constituencies, but now the checks and balances are weaker and the situation is extraordinary, so it's easier to bend the rules. So if these are the elements of definition that I would want to highlight about the state capture. When I speak about state capture, I speak about 3 things. One is that it is about the capture of rules of the game. So changing the legislation, changing the institutions. So it's not your everyday's corruption, giving a bribe and getting something in return. It's actually changing the rules of the game so to maximize the benefit for the few, for a person in charge or a group in charge. So that's the difference from just ordinary corruption. It's a systemic way of getting private benefit from public resources. What is also important is that state capture is always about some type of ideology, or some narratives are used to justify what's going on, to legitimize why this is possible. In the case of Belgrade waterfront that I shared with you, the story of modernization, of cleaning the downtown of the capital was projected over mass media to justify this initiative. I see Fikile from South Africa is giving examples of 2 public enterprises. Yes, I think these are also covered and would be example of this regulatory and institutional repurposing, so to get the private interest out. And I'm going to mention a South African example in a second. And then the third thing is that state capture often leads to changing the nature of political system, because in order to draw resources out, you need to limit the competition. So it often influences also the nature of political system, and countries that might have started as democracies or elites that have won legitimately elections start abusing the institutions and changing the rules of the game, so to narrow down the possibilities for others to endanger their position in future. So I want to keep long in this definitioning things, but what I found important to highlight in my work, for example, with colleagues from EU, is that this context is not the consequence of the lack of development or lack of resources or lack of knowledge and capacity. And, you know, this is why our institutions are not functioning. It's actually intentional and by design process of a well-connected groups of people who change the rules of the game so that they could benefit. And actually the colleagues from South Africa, which is the first country that has officially been named captured state, and where there has been a lot of work by think tanks to actually educate both the national and international audience on the concept, have developed this phrase, repurposing institutions. So institutions remain, but their mandates, their funding, their rules of governance change, so to fulfill 4 functions. So to limit the competition, to enable extraction of resources, but also what is important is to decrease checks and balances. Civil society media are often the target in state capture states. And last but not the least, to maintain impunity. And this is why, for example, judiciary, law enforcement, intelligence services are key for state capture to survive. I won't go much into details, but this is a kind of a recipe I've seen in a number of countries, and it varies from country to country. What is the order of the institutions that you're going to take, or sectors that you're going to capture? But usually it has to do with capturing the parliament. And as I mentioned, it could be in a democratic way through elections. And then you abuse the parliament to change the legislation, to decrease transparency, to increase the chances for your side to compete. It is related to controlling narratives. And this is why media is usually among the first targets to be captured, either through control of state government advertisements or privatization, or many different ways. But also civil society, and as we've seen, for example, in Hungary, academia got targeted so that you could not hear even the narrow expert community different alternative of reality. So you need to capture different voices in society to dominate the narrative about what's going on. And then I think Fikile has mentioned the examples of two public enterprises in South Africa. They are often a target of state capture. Public procurement is a great way to pull out resources, natural resources, monopolies on natural resources, or as we heard last year on Think Tanks Conference in Zimbabwe, there was an introduction of a special tax which was used to draw out resources. And last but not the least, as I mentioned, it is also through capturing those that should enforce the law and that should prosecute those that abuse institutions. What I found relevant and much of literature has missed is this point about how narratives and political processes are important for state capture. And I'm just going to share with you two examples. So from my neighbor, Hungary, where Viktor Orban, after his re-election in 2014, blamed the globalization for social inequalities, for marginalization of countries in Central Europe, and promoted this nationalism ideology, which is illustrated here with the cover page of obligatory textbook in literature for 11-year-old kids, which promotes nation first, family second, and only then look for your own good. So this nationalism in the first place to justify why, for example, government can take over media, can put, for example, military during the COVID crisis in public enterprises and so on. And he was the first to actually claim that we don't necessarily need to live in liberal democracy because it's a problem that caused the inequalities. Illiberal democracies are equally good as long as they care about the nation and the people. And we know who are these people. They are only Christian, Hungarian, European, and everyone else that doesn't fall into these categories are seen as a problem. And I think Mia mentioned in an intro exercise that she's not sure how to call US. Much of this is quoted actually from the article from The Atlantic, which compares the US and Hungary with this justification. But I wanted to share also the example from South Africa, from this brilliant book on shadow state, which actually I think increases the complexity of the topic of state capture, because it actually shows that this ideology can respond to legitimate concerns of citizens. So I'll ask Fikile to correct me, but this is what the think tankers and academics for South Africa have claimed that has been an ideology that ZUP use to actually capture the institutions. So in response to economy being owned by white people as a consequence of apartheid, there was this move after apartheid for Black people empowerment, involvement in economy, correction of this huge social injustice. And his interpretation of how to do it better was radical economic transformation, which targeted exactly the social enterprises that were mentioned by Fikile, and also prioritizing Black businesses through public procurement. So under the justifiable explanation that if the Black businesses are put first, the injustice will be corrected and the more balanced economic participation will be allowed, they actually created a mechanism to channel resources to those that were close to the party, to the ANC. And these were the public procurement to the Black businesses and by the big state-owned enterprises. So I'm sure that that you might have some other ideologies Yeah, I see Fikila's comment that this was the justification, but the Black businesses and empowerment was not used by Black business, but by minority of few. And this is exactly the explanation of the state capture that I was giving. I would ask other participants also to write in a chat of other types of discourses or stories you heard that were used by politicians to justify why they should be given open space to guide institutions to change the rules of the game and actually take the benefits and impunity for their close group of allies. My point about the state capture is that it looks different in different countries, but these three elements of repurposing institutions, using political processes or narratives, and frequently affecting the political competition are the same. So I'm going to share you and not spend much time on it, these variations, and what we came up with at the last year's on think tanks conference in Geneva, where a number of colleagues from different countries have brainstormed exactly the topics that were used to justify privileging the few. And as you can see, they can be even the topics like fight against corruption. So in my home country, the current ruling party, when they came into power, actually promised to confront the corruption, arrested one of the biggest oligarchs, and justified the change of the rules so that the vice prime minister at that time could be at the same time vice prime minister, minister of defense, and the secretary of National Security Council, where all the intelligence services and all security institutions were represented. So overnight, they changed the legislation so that all power over the repressive apparatus in a country could be in the hands of one person under the justification of the fight against corruption. And of course, there are conditions or real experiences that have contributed and that they've built on and that vary from country to country. Also, the variation is in who are the captors. So this is also the result of the brainstorming from last year's. As you can see, there could be one person, ethnic group, business group, as we heard in a case of South Africa, and this cartoon is also from South Africa, where the Gupta family has actually been linked to the ANC, the African National Congress, and used to pull out resources. Political parties, oligarchs, very frequent, especially in Eastern Europe, or what is interesting is these networks of different type of actors. Initially, when the academic literature and state capture was established in the mid-90s, it was mostly about the influence of business on political elites, so to change the rules of the game so that they would profit. It was one-directional. Later on, it was about political parties influencing different institutions, but now there is awareness that you usually have more than just one source or one type of actor, and that the relationship among these different actors is multi-directional. But as I said, it varies from country to country. And I'll soon finish my speaking. I see you are listing in different examples. So from Bosnia, I see Mia mentioned contracts for COVID-19 related procurements awarded to friends. Jessica in Kenya, as president, is using the legacy angle to control parliament and political parties. This would be very interesting to hear what the legacy connotation is in a case of Kenya. But what I would want to ask you is just to see if the poll is maybe ready. Yes. So if I can ask you to fill in. Okay, there are three, in a poll, there are a few questions, but I think three are missing. Yeah, maybe we go back. I would want to ask if anyone wants to join me on camera and with audio, and just share if you live in a country which you consider a state capture, how that affected the work of your organization or think tanks, you know. So if anybody wants to join on camera, you just press the camera and audio sign twice, and it will bring you to the stage to share also your voice on these matters and your experience. Maybe I can call Jessica to explain also Kenya's example. Thank you, Erica. I saw the polls, but one part is missing. So anyway, we will use it later. Anyone wants to join on the stage through video and audio and just share the experience from their country? I saw a couple of examples from South Africa, Kenya. We've seen there were colleagues from Latin America with us, from Argentina, Balkans. So anyone want to join in? Please, Simonida, join in. Yes, in the Balkans, North Macedonia was the first to be called out state capture, and thanks to this example, we all got the right to use it in our advocacy. So please join us. Shall I allow? Oh, okay. Have I allowed you guys to go in now? Is there something? Yes. Hi, Jessica. Great to see you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Yeah, so what you're speaking about is really very current in Kenya. So our current president is finishing his term in 2022. Well, that's when our next election takes place. And he has differences with his deputy president. And because the deputy president controls the political party in a big way, what he has gone out of his way is to try and contain that power. And what he has done is gone ahead and used parliament to do it by making sure all the senior positions which were given to his party are given to people who are loyalists, who are only obligated to him rather than the DP. And at the same time, he's also making sure that he says he only wants people who are going to pass laws and agendas and budgets which are aligned with his legacy projects, the projects he wants to run before that he wants to be remembered for. And one of the projects is the one I was talking about earlier, that there's a road which is passing by the national park, and this road would not have been approved as easily if he hadn't managed to do this, both within his party and also within parliament. So he has changed the leadership of the party, but also not just even, he has also extended beyond the party and gone on to try and get smaller parties to join, even including the opposition, which used to be in parliament. They all are like one big national coalition now. And we don't really say that there is voice, public voice has been compromised in the way he has done it. And so that's why I was talking about the legacy tag, and everything is used, even all the National Day celebrations, his speeches are only focused on his legacy.
And how does it affect the work of think tanks and civil society in Kenya?
So now,
what are the challenges?
So people are having to find alternative ways of engaging, especially the street protests or having conversations on Twitter. The courts have been our best bet. And right now he's trying to rein them in by making sure they have lower budget. They don't have enough budget. In fact, he told them when he made the decision, when they made the decision to annul his first election in 2017, he told them he will remember, he will revisit, and he has gone ahead to do just that. And right now, as recent as last year, a new batch of judges was supposed to have been appointed through a credible system, but he has gone ahead. He's supposed to, just go approve the final batch of people who are selected, but he has refused to let them start working. And of course, cut the budget of the judiciary, because judiciary has actually been the institution that is carrying public interests beyond the civil society and working with civil society.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. This is, I think, a really good example of how those that can narrow the power of the guys like judiciary are people target, and also civil society relying to judiciary. Is there anything else you want to add on think tanks, or shall we invite someone else?
Please invite someone else. I'm done. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Jessica, very much. Erika, would you allow, I think Simonida and Fikile have also volunteered to share some of the story of the state capture in their countries and how it affected think tanks. So I think I've put the approval, but I don't see anyone on the stage. So I guess Erika would need to help out. Did I do it for Jessica? I think I did it then also for Fikile and Simonida. So guys, please join me on the stage and share your story. Yeah, Anapure, you can also join. I don't know where is guests in the queue.
Hi. Hi. So, if I may just share very briefly, ours is capturing because we live in the largest democratic country. So sometimes a lot of things come from the national level. Sometimes it's the state level. But I think what COVID has done for many organizations, especially think tanks, is the way the corporate funding. So we have one of our key funders are corporate as a rule. The state as a law, the state says that an X% of their profit should be given to not-for-profit organization. So what has happened in many of the organizations is suddenly this funding has stopped because everybody says now COVID-19, whether you can work, whether you cannot work. So any proposals that we write goes directly, we have to tune our proposals and funding based on COVID-19, whether we want it or not for COVID-19. Of course we want it, but that was not part of our, say, mandate for our organization. So it's become a little dilemma for some people. Should we change our mandate just because there's funding and COVID-19, or how do we integrate it? That's what many of us are doing. Of course, we work primarily in health and nutrition. We work in school education. We work in livelihood. We work in gender, which overarches. So it is okay for an organization like ours. But there are many organizations, and I've heard from many of the NGOs who are supporting communities in the villages. They are in very bad shape because funding has stopped from the corporate. Everybody wants to give, So, and everybody wants to please the government. So if I have to call that state capturing, in a way, yes, the state has captured all the attention of the corporate funders. You know, it become a mandate that they have to give it for COVID-19, only for COVID-19, only for COVID-19. So it's a very catch-22 situation in many of the places that we have.
Thank you. I'm not sure it's 100% state
Yeah,
capture,
it is not.
but it's how emergency framing
Yeah.
can narrow the focus of public policy. Thank you very much. And I'm going to try, to try again to allow or something to do to.
Yes,
Simonita is there.
I tried again.
Hi,
I logged out again. Hi. So we have a guest as well who wouldn't let me go. Yes.
Great.
Well, in our case, as you rightly mentioned, North Macedonia was actually the first in the Balkans to be named a captured state. But the labeling came from the outside. So I think that it's very important that there is a certain external actor or an external ally of think tanks in order to help with this, let's say, assessment as such. I think that, I mean, it took some time in our case. Sorry, baby's angry. It took some time in our case to get there, however. I think that civil society was for some time saying that this is the case, let's say since 2011. And it took some time also for us to show to our external counterparts that this was happening. But I think the mechanisms are some, you outlined most of them. It was a capture of parliament, mostly through weakening the opposition systematically, using the state resources for party purposes, but also basically equating, in our case, the party and the state, because the state in many ways became the party. And I think that it's very much, I think that the example that we usually give is that the party that we're talking about, irrelevant of which one, basically became richer than the CDU in Germany, financial resources. And this helped very much this equation of party and state, and at the same time created a huge patronage link with their constituency, because their constituency, and I think this is something that relates to many elections as to why the playing field is not level down the road in any of the elections, because the party in place basically created such a clientelistic link with their supporters, but also worked on extending and using the state resources primarily for this purpose. And just to go back to your second question, how did this affect the work of think tanks? I think that, I mean, we were lucky to have this situation prevented at a certain point, because there was a big orchestrated government action against civil society in terms of discussions that we have now in Lex NGO in Hungary. We had similar attempts here in terms of basically targeting civil society organizations that have been funded by specific donor, OSI more precisely. Think tanks basically it was very difficult to find constituency to work with. But then we identified some, let's say, brave individuals or sufficiently independent individuals within within the ministry, within the judiciary. I think judges were mentioned before. And we cherished this relationship very much, because I think they were our main driver. They were our main agents of change that we could actually also get information, but also influence on. In the second thing that we did, and we've discussed this with you personally, is that actually we, as a think tank, could not reach out that much to engage the public, but we did find alternative methods to work on public opinion, to work on specifically we used deliberative polling as a method to assist us in also working on public opinion systematically, because we were not the organization that would go to the streets. We never were. But for example, we looked for methods that allowed us to engage with some samples of the public and also change their opinion long term. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Simonida, Director of European Policy Institute in North Macedonia, for highlighting both the functioning of state capture, but more importantly, this part on think tanks, how you adapted your strategy to nourish the few brave individuals in government and judiciary, and also to engage in the public in a very think tanky way, but to change the politics. Thank you very much. I'll ask Tequila to join, and please also regards to Simonida's kid for letting her be with us.
So, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm Figida, and I am trying to start a think tank in South Africa, personally. What I have actually noticed with the COVID situation currently is that obviously we don't have a lot of think tanks in South Africa, and those that we do have are affiliated with political parties in general. So it's someone who is also part of the political party, who is what we call the elite within South Africa in that space of politicians. And so therefore it's directly linked to the political party in general. They are think tanks. So they're doing the work of the political party, not necessarily the work that is supposed to contribute to the public or society as a whole, but for the mandate of the politics within the political party. So, I mean, we have same cases where projects were being given to people that are affiliated still with the political party, whether it's a research organization or the small research organization that call themselves think tanks, have received funding to do work that is based on the mandate of the current government and the political mandate of our our politicians. So we haven't had really, like you would find someone who is an outside think tank that has been given an opportunity in South Africa, someone that is new or no one has heard of, given a certain opportunity. So that has not happened. And also, I mean, with my experience this year trying to establish a think tank, I find that I've been coming through many roadblocks because I am not part of a certain political party. So you get to have a lot of roadblocks because people then don't trust you very well. They don't know what your mandate is. And this is all due to the state capture, because they don't trust if they will give you a project, how would you interpret that project? Are you going to agree with their definition of things, or would you oppose the definition of things? And if you come across as opposing too much and pointing out some of the corruption that is happening, then you are not included, even if no matter how great your ideas are or how excellent you are. And I've seen this with where I used to work at a university in a research and development unit, that even with the researchers themselves or the professors themselves, the professor has to become affiliated with the people so that they can get projects, so they can get funding, so their students can be given awards for, so they seem like they're doing better than other projects, other professors. So it's really is a horrible thing in South Africa, to be honest. There's no one place where there is no state capture in South Africa. It's just like a ripple effect. It's everywhere. It's in the sciences, it's in engineering, it's everywhere. Yeah. So
thank you very much. This is very example. Why there is resonance.
Yes.
Is it better now? Okay. I think what you mentioned is very important to distinguish from the systems in which, for example, in UK, in US, of course, you have think tanks affiliated to the parties, and that's the way of presenting the different views. But there is a competition of ideas. While from what I hear, you are saying this is not just to have a value-based think tanks or affiliated to parties. It is actually unfair competition. There are these clientelistic relationships that prevent from presenting different views. And I especially think what you highlighted, that the state captors don't like different interpretation of reality nor showcasing of corruption. So it really puts think tanks in a difficult position. Is there anyone else want to join on a stage at this stage? Or can I ask everyone to fill in the poll? There are a few questions there, guys, for you before we move to the community of practice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fikile. So if you can fill in the poll, there are 5 questions. The 3 questions are related to community of practice, and then there is the one: do you live in or work in the in a capture state? So do you live in a country that is captured or work with the organizations that are in capture state? And how does state capture affect your work? So it doesn't affect seriously. We have still not been affected. Our organization has been directly engaged with the topic of state capture, researching it, as Simonida mentioned, or advocating that it gets recognized as a context. Or has your organization been under pressure or attack, or the groups that you work with, because of highlighting some of the issues related to state capture? So these are the 2 questions, and then you can leave the other 3 questions on community of practice for later. So if you could fill in, please, a poll. Oh, I see also Samantha wants to join. I would love to hear her on a panel. Hopefully we'll get also Samantha from Argentina and from RESDAL, the Latin American Network on Defense and Security, to join us and share also her experience. Samantha, you should press the blue button if I follow Erica's instructions correctly. Oh, it's gray now, so please try again. Thank you, Simonida, for a tip. So guys, if you can fill in the poll. There are also questions from the other session. Hey, and Samantha.
Can you hear me?
Samantha.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Sorry, I think I have some problems with the connection. I don't know. I lost for some minutes, so I didn't hear the last part. You talking about the pool, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to comment something small about Argentina, because I'm from Argentina. Of course, there are some other examples of state capture in some other countries in Latin American region. But in this case, I think it's something interesting, because here we have a new government since December. So they started, and it's a different political party than the previous one. So they started on December with, the very beginning, and then COVID. And I think they also use this particular situation of the emergency also to do exactly what you mentioned before, the narrow the possibilities. I mean, in this particular case, we have been in lockdown since 3 months so far. And I think that of course there is a health situation, and some health policies are needed, but most of the people right now are thinking that they are using this as part, to narrow the possibility from civil society and think tanks, but in general to, present their own ideas and be against some political issues right now. So they are taking advantage of this situation also to Nowadays, we have the situation of the expropriation, of a very important enterprise. And now is a huge scandal here in Argentina because they are using this specific case to go against this group. Of course, that enterprise has some issues, but it's not. We are all agreed that it's not necessary to expropriate the enterprise. So they are, taking some advantage for this situation to go over the judiciary, over, some other groups. But regarding the civil society organizations, they already capture, I mean, as the political party and that ideology, they already have their own civil society organizations that support this group, this particular group. So it's not that they are against or limited the possibilities for all the civil society organizations, because they are using their own civil society organization and this person to talk for them. So I think that's interesting too, because not always is that this party or this group or this network is against the civil society organizations and look for, quiet them and cut them, but it's also that they can use some of them, so
Yes.
that is very interesting too. Of course, it will need more deeply research on this particular topic, but I think that would be an interesting example just to share.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and especially for this part on civil society, like fake or civil society or gongos. And yes, you're right. State capture doesn't have to be authoritarian immediately. It could play with democracy and create the noise and make a confusion. I mean, we also experienced in Serbia that the ruling party was setting up NGOs that have the similar name, even same design of the website as some of the most vocal civil society organizations. And they were given, the space, as you said, to speak on their behalf or to attack the legitimate civil society. So I think that's why state capture is a very perverse concept, because to a person who doesn't know it from inside, it could look like a normal competition and debate within civil society, for example.
Exactly. And sometimes maybe they can, without knowing, working for them. So that's very tricky too. I mean, it's interesting to think about that, especially in this context, because it's very politicized. It's right to say that. I mean, it's or or one side or the other side. So the previous government for this party, not but the one before that, that was the situation. So they continue like that. So you are on one side or on the other side, and that's also very complicated because this power used that, the politicization, So that is my. Thank you, Sonja.
Thank you very much for sharing the political dynamics. I'm going to move just quickly to what you were saying about. I've tried to summarize the typical consequences for think tanks, and you can add on in chat if I forgot something, and I'm sure I did. And then I want to discuss the community of practice and how we may support each other in future. So I think Simonida was the one who put this question: who is think tank constituency? Who is that we want to influence? We were all raised to think that we should influence those that make decisions. But what if these usually guys that make the decisions are actually bad guys or are doing things that we disagree with? Should the policymakers remain our primary target, or shall these be, as in Simonida and North Macedonian case, some professionals within institutions that still keeps integrity and might be a whistleblowers or just somebody who is trying to protect the profession? Or shall we turn to the public? And ours is, are think tanks capable of engaging with public? I think Simonida mentioned that they decided not to go into more of NGO type of mode, but to use the research and deliberative polling to engage with the public and allow citizens to discuss the key issues. But I think it's a big question for a think tank community. Who do we want to influence and how in this very unique and difficult environment? The other consequence that again depends on a particular context in particular country is if our research becomes more difficult. And I think Fikile has mentioned that access can be limited depending on clientelistic patronage links, but also access to evidence can be limited through changes of legislation, which make confidential a number of areas that used to be, for example, public, or by just the lack of will of those empowered to engage and share the evidence. And then what Samantha just mentioned is how do we engage in this super charged, polarized, and noisy environment where there are shadow actors besides the shadow institutions that are competing with think tanks and other parts of civil society. And last but not the least, how does it affect the management of the organization and care of the people? Because you might be in position that your staff or your work gets pressured. I have listed here the latest example from my life. I'm a member of a board of a think tank in Serbia, and at this link you will see the story made by actually a fake portal and then broadcasted on a network of local TV stations, where they put the bios of us from the board of the organization, putting the correct information, but saying that we are all NATO agents that try to destabilize the country. So it is about this framing of correct facts of who was educated where and what we did in our career that creates the noise and creates the smear campaign against the individuals. And I think Fikile has also mentioned the funding and how it gets influenced. So these were some of the topics on how it influences think tanks. I would love to discuss how we can influence, but I think for the sake of time, what I suggest is we move to discussion on community of practice and whether you would be interested to pursue the debate that we have now in future. And this is my offer to you, and I would love to hear your comments in relation to it. So having lived in a state captured state and worked with a number of state captured states, I've realized that we all think it's very unique what's going on in our country, and it's very difficult, and that actually we could learn a lot from each other. So that's why I want to host, together with On Think Tanks, this community where we could discuss and better understand how state capture functions. What are the similar patterns? What are the differences in different countries? What are the tactics and strategies deployed by the captors so that we can learn from each other and maybe prevent it in our countries? But also what has happened to think tanks and civil society? So what could we do to protect our organizations, our constituencies, and to remain influential? So to hear, for example, more in detail from Simonida, from others, what could think tanks do? I mentioned the example of South Africa, where the think tank and academics report called Beyond the Promise was the one that actually explained the state capture to the whole society and became one of the turning points in getting rid of Zupta and the Gupta family that were capturing the South African society and the state. And last but not the least, what I want us to achieve together is to come up with the explanations and arguments that could persuade those that want to support civil society to adjust their approaches to this unique context. So hopefully we will come up with certain things that would be relevant also for donors and other supporters of civil society. And what I propose, how to do it, is to have monthly meetings via internet, like we are having now, where we could either discuss and exchange the practices and our experiences, or maybe have a guest speaker, so kind of webinar, either, you know, excellent academics that have studied these issues, or investigative journalists, or other people that could help us understand the concept better and how it has evolved in different countries. Enrique has proposed, and I think in chat for a whole group, to do an exchange also in between meetings through an email, or we could use any other platform where we could maybe just share, you know, like useful examples, useful resources and so on, or showcase our work. And last but not the least, I would want to invite you to contribute to building a knowledge, either by joining me in interviewing some of the guest speakers, or writing blogs on this topic on think tanks, or helping produce a flagship paper that would summarize our discussions. So, bye guys, and thanks a lot for joining me today.